All right. Mashika Tawe. Buenas noches. Cuvole. My name is Mark Harris. This is the 5th installment of DiversiTV. And we are waiting for guests who may be fighting a snowstorm that has just occurred. But we have 2 guests planned for tonight. Michael Samano and Leslie Sorianto-Cervantes, both LCC faculty members of the Latino persuasion. Just let me briefly recap the schedule as we've got it planned. Let's see, switching over. So go to slide if you would. So DiversiTV-Xiacano, Latino, Hispanic perspective. You heard me greet you in Aztec. Mexica Tawe means all my relations in Aztec. Semantically equivalent to like the Lakota, Mataquiasi, all my relations. Cuvole is a kind of gang slang about what's happening, what's up. Buenas noches, you're probably familiar with good evening, good night. To recap our schedule, as we've had it for week 1, was Native Americans. Week 2 was Anglos. Week 3, Eugene, African American history. Week 4, Asian perspective with Nadia Raza. We took a week off for President's Day because we don't broadcast when the college is closed. Week 5, which is today, Latino perspective. And week 6, women, gender, GLB, Two-Spirit. That'll be next Monday. And then finishing off this term, week 7, disability, March 12th, and then the youth perspective, week 8. And then we'll be starting all over next spring term with a new slate of guests and basically looking at many of the same topics. Tonight, our expected guests are Michael Samano, who's coordinator of ethnic studies, and Leslie Soriano-Cervantes, who's a counselor with academic learning skills in the counseling department. I wanted to do a little setup, and that being looking at our constructs of race. So one of the things that we deal with in terms of the ethnic studies department is looking at this race question. And part of the race question is looking at who's doing the defining. So for example, whether it's the 3-race construct out of Germany, Blumenbach's construct, where it's Caucasoid, Mongoloid, Negroid, basically coming from a biblical perspective of humanity starting over after the flood, and then the first race being Caucasoid, which means literally of the Caucasus, and meaning essentially white people, and then everybody else devolved from them. So the Mongoloid race devolved from Caucasoid, and then the Negroid race devolved from the Mongoloid. We are also looking at, for example, biologically, if you go to slide, biologically, outside of the political constructs, biologically there's one race, the human race. And then when we start getting into politics, which deals with the distribution of power and influence among human groups, then you can either have egalitarian, that is equal distribution of power, or hierarchical. So one of the first hierarchical, well, at least when we talk about what's happening on Turtle Island, the people of the 4 directions, the native perspective, as you regular watchers are now familiar, the east is the yellow race, the south is the black race, the west is the red race, and the south is, the north rather, is the white race. You can also have the three races construct, Caucasoid, Mongoloid, Negroid. And from the three races construct, you have the federal 5 plus other, which if you've ever filled out a job application, you know what that is. So this is a graphic basically of the four races construct, 4 directions, 4 races. And so that's what the show was originally based on, the 4 races, 4 directions construct. And part of the mythology that goes along, or the narrative, if you will, that goes along with that, is that the 4 races mix and they create multiple races. And among those, Latino and Pacific Islanders, among others. So in the African crossroads, Latino could be an intersection of the 3 out of the 4. So African, Native, European, and sometimes 4 races, Asian, where you have people like the president of Peru, Alberto Fujimori, or you could have Chinese, Cuban restaurants, or anything like that. Or those people, they're not Hispanic, but what are they within the federal group? That's hard to say, and our guests will probably be able to talk about that. Within Spanish, we look at least 4 different constructs within that, from blanco, mulata, moreno, zambo, which is basically talking about degrees of skin color within that particular framework. So in my ethnic studies class, we often talk about Africans coming here before Columbus, the Olmec heads being one tangible piece of evidence about that. We also look at sculptures like La Mulata, who's referred to as a foot-high statue from the Yucatan, tentatively dated from around 800 AD. And if it's accurate, that is the timing, 800 AD, it shows that there was an African presence that was long after the Olmecs, yet before the arrival of the Spaniards. So one of the things that shows from a Turtle Island perspective is that a number of us had contact before the Columbus discovered America narrative became present, and there were various attempts to organize and orchestrate those folks together. So, for example, one maroon, which is a Taino word which means wild and free, Gaspar Yanga, who this statue basically depicts. He was an African of royal birth in Africa, captured as a slave, brought over to Mexico, and the Spanish brought between 200,000 to 500,000 African slaves to Mexico to work the silver mines and gold mines and sugar plantations. And Africans did what they normally do under such conditions. They revolted and joined the Indians, because where do you escape in chattel slavery but into Indian country? And they formed an alliance to drive out the quote-unquote white Castilian Spanish settlers. So the term for these alliances and independent communities comes from the Taino language Maroon. Taino are the people that Columbus originally encountered at Guanahani Island, which means wild and free, that term Maroon. So a Spanish word of the word cimarron combines the Taino word maroon with the Spanish word for mountaintop, which basically talks about these Africans' proclivities for heading to the hills because the hills are easier to defend. In my own home state, California, Pico Boulevard is named after the last Mexican governor, Pio Pico, and his pictured here, who put up a valiant defense against the attempted, well, actually successful theft of Mexico by the United States in order to, among other things, in the state of Tejas, perpetuate slavery, because the second president of Mexico, Vicente Guerrero, who will be pictured here shortly, one of his acts within the first few months of office was to eliminate slavery throughout all Mexico, which included not only Tejas, but all the states that have Spanish names. that are now part of the United States. Emiliano Zapata and his sister. Here's Zapata. Basically, this is just to talk about, the African strain within the Latino, Hispanic, Chicano genome. His sister side by side. So there are mixed race families, often having siblings of contrasting hues. Zapata and his sister appears more African than Emiliano, and both he and his sister are darker than their sister Maria de Jesus and their brother Eufemio. Regarding photos, you can basically change the coloring of the photo as part of the development process, but certainly the African strain was there, as depicted by Vicente, who was a black Indian former slave, who, as president of Mexico, actually not only freed the slaves, but was reputed to design the flag. And what the flag of Mexico means, 3 colors: green for the color of the land that is now free and independent of Spain, white for our respect for the church, red for the color that blows alike through all of us. So whether you're African, European, or indigenous native, your blood is still red, and this red in the Mexican flag is basically talking about that unity across what we now consider separate racial categories. So tonight's guests, Michael Samano, who's a faculty and coordinator of ethnic studies on your screen right, and Leslie Soriano-Servantes, counselor in the counseling department assigned to academic learning skills. Welcome, both of you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Pleased to see you. So I sent them a group of questions which we may use to inform our discussion, but let me play dumb white boy for a second. What do you people want to be called? And what is the difference between Chicano, as you saw on the slide, I spelled it with an X, and Latino and Hispanic? Can you give us a perspective of naming? Like, everybody knows it's probably not a good idea to use the N word with African Americans, probably not Negro, probably not colored. What do you people want to be called, black? Or I don't want to insult anybody. Yeah.
For me, I don't mind being called Latina.
Okay. Personal choice?
Personal choice,
Okay.
Hispanic, Latina. I'm
All
fine with either or.
I guess I would probably start off with what I want to be called is very contextual to who I'm with, who I'm around, what's going on. So since I was born and raised in Oregon, depending on if I'm talking to people that are also from Oregon, I might be able to talk Oregonian talk. Not to be confused with indigenous Oregon people. So I might be a native Oregonian, meaning I was born here, but I'm not a native Oregonian of the original peoples of this region. I'm a military veteran, so with some people that's the primary identity. I'm also biracial. I know some people are into talking about that. I guess that overall, I see myself as a Chicano, and within being a Chicano, I probably would most likely identify as an indigenous Chicano, but I would use that term very selectively, and it really depends on who I'm talking to. I'm not much of a fan of being referred to as a Latino, and I don't answer to Hispanic, but I might go with Mexican American, kind of depending on my mood. And in terms of what people can refer to me as, they can start with sir, and then we can work our way down from there. So.
All right, fair enough. So, as you say, the meaning is it's contextual, depends on what your mood is and what you choose to identify with and call to people's attention. So, One of my justifications for inviting and having this panel, besides the people of the four directions and looking at combination, it's really easy in terms of picking Latinos, Hispanics, to talk about immigration as a peg, and maybe we'll get into that. No doubt we will get into that. But having witnessed another conversation around immigration, I quite frankly got tired of where the tone of the conversation usually goes, and which perspectives usually are or not brought into play. So, for example, there is usually not a discussion about the racial implications or the racial policies within. I mean, usually when you talk about immigration reform, there is no talk about reforming the racist policies. For example, let's take it the state of Oregon, in which American citizens who were African American citizens of other states were not allowed to come to Oregon in the formation of its state. So here you had a state that was allowed to join the Union with racial exclusion policies. Built into its constitution was basically the notion that white foreigners were encouraged to come and immigrate here. Even though they weren't citizens of the United States, they would enjoy the full right. So here you have already a racial divide. We know with the feet wet policy, immigration policy in Cuba, where Cubans that look like me, if they land in Cuba, I mean, yes, they're quote-unquote illegal immigrants, but when they land in Cuba, they're sent back as Haitians. If they're as light as you two, they get to stay. And that's a policy that's documented in a number of places, but most recently, John's magazine, George, where he talked about Elian Gonzalez and that whole furor, where there were other people along with Elian that survived that particular sea voyage, one of them being a Zambo Cuban. And so one of the things I pointed out in my setup is 1/3 of what we call Latin America has African blood and has African features, and so how does that play into one, immigration policy, and then two, politics in Latin America? So using the ancient model of immigration, where Turtle Island, you have many nations but no borders at all. You have people's traditional territory as native people, but there is no exclusion policy keeping people in or out, though I know that your ancestors that you refer to as the biker Indians might have something to say about that. But essentially, nobody's having a border patrol. So my first question is, how do we create a culture that incorporates what the children of Tenochtitlan, or Aztlan, if you will, Chichen Itza, or Machu Picchu have to offer us? Ancient indigenous cultures that had civilization, that were complex, and that to some degree, even though those cities don't exist as discrete political entities anymore, I'm thinking that immigrants to this country have something to contribute. How do we create a culture that incorporates that?
Samano?
I'm speechless because whether we look at an indigenous population as defined by the U.S. government, meaning that there's basically 1% of people left, and within that 1% you have a wide range of ideologies, people that are, I guess, more indigenous than others, and then you have the so-called Hispanic or Latino people that may or may not be indigenous, kind of depending on who you talk to, and I guess they're anywhere from 12 to 14% of our population, just referring to the United States. So when you're asking these questions, I'm having to answer as somebody who is a subordinate in this country. So, I'm compelled to say, well, I guess it's, when the massa decides that we can sit at the table and possibly have an opinion on this matter. Otherwise, it's just, I think we should do this, or I think we should do that. But everything that I would come up with for answers are within the context that we hold, I would guess, close to zero power and influence in this country. And so I guess that's kind of where I will at least position myself before I make my next comment.
Okay. Leslie, want to take a stab at it? Because I know that you deal with, one of the powerful things about inviting you is I know that you deal with people who are undocumented in an educational context.
Mm-hmm. So you were talking about, can you clarify the question? How do we?
Sure.
Okay.
I'm coming from the point, I'll even simplify it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm assuming that there is a plus that about immigrants coming from what the indigenous here refer to as the great red cities of the South, right? So one, people who came from here came from those particular cities. There's a reason why I made reference to the ancient names for those cities, that there is a cultural heritage on this continent that's deep. They were welcomed, okay? And they made a positive contribution. And I'm assuming they're making a positive contribution today, at least in the terms of being willing to brave a desert and come here illegally to a place that you don't speak the language, where, you know, where Massa, as Michael put it, talks out of both sides of Massa's mouth. We don't want you here, but our industries depend on you. So from my context as a descendant of slaves, the movement north for African slaves up into Canada is a movement to freedom. I see Latinos coming north across the border as coming for freedom. And in the same context, they're slaves. So I have a responsibility to welcome them. And I don't care what Massa says, because, they here. So let's incorporate them into our culture, into our country. How do we do that? In a perfect world.
Yeah, in a perfect world. It's so funny because we were just having a conversation the other day about this. You know, it's like where I go to El Salvador, I'm not Salvadorian. I'm here, I'm not North American because I'm brown. So where am I at? Where do I belong? And a lot of it has to do, it's like in educating our youth, educating the people around us, and letting them know it's like, you know, we're all immigrants. We all come from different parts of the world. We weren't here first, you know, so it's like, it's in educating, it's, you know, why, you know, it's like these people are here, you know, not these people, why people come to this country. Being, you know, it's like, we're talking about the, you know, people that come from south of the border. You know, it's like why they come here. It's like we all have different needs. We all have different, you know, ideas. You know, it's like different dreams of why to come here. And it's kind of clarifying it that people aren't coming here to, the conversation that we were having this weekend was, is like, are they coming here to steal the jobs? And it's not about that. It's like, just like everybody else comes for different dreams, different reasons. It's coming to understand that, you know, we're all human beings. And it's like, just, you know, understand it's like why everybody's here. And a lot of it has to do with educating people. And one thing I love about my job is that I get to do that. I get to educate the people that I work with. You know, it's like we're always learning, you know, so.
Good. One of the things when I see you both, can we pan back to camera so we get a shot of both of them? When I look at you, okay, as a native person, and I'm just claiming it, I see two Indians. I see two Indians. So it's a matter of perspective, okay? You're Salvadoreña, you know, you're a native Oregonian, you know, and, you know, when you go to El Salvador, well, you're an American. When you're here in America, no, you're not an American because you're brown. Well, again, who is defining that, or who are you allowing to define that? Because, again, from another perspective, you also could be native here. I mean, whether you were born here or not, you were still welcome on this continent in the old rules and more of an egalitarian rules. So, I mean, again, when blacks went into Canada, you know, they were free by the decree of the Queen. Do we need a king or a queen or a president to legitimize folks that are here? I there are political realities. I recognize that. But I think sovereignty, as our native folks talked about in our first panel, starts inside and starts with us looking at our own decolonization, as it were, and starting with your own attitude.
Well, I like what Leslie was saying about education, because with my own son, he's going to be taught and raised to have a sovereign, autonomous spirit within him, so that he understands and can fully appreciate that he is of this hemisphere. He doesn't need to be concerning himself with specific labels or nationalistic tendencies of this country or some other country. The reality is that he's going to be an indigenous man, or maybe beyond manhood, he'll be an indigenous human, whatever that means for him. But that it's his right to exist in whatever space that he wants to exist in. So it doesn't concern me to go to Mexico and have people point out to me that I'm not Mexican, and to exist in this space and have people attempt to pigeonhole me or to say you don't belong here or you don't belong there or we're going to call you this or we're going to call you that. I control that within myself, and it takes a lot of energy to exist like that. But I want to be able to provide my son with the tools where it won't take a lot of energy for him to be who he needs to be, regardless of where he's at or who starts tripping on him or whatever. And it's kind of a ripple effect. Hopefully that within our household we have certain conversations, and we'll be able to raise him with certain types of ideas or ideologies, and then that can just kind of ripple out from there. So,
Leslie, do you see any either gifts or skills that the people that you feel need to be educated or that come to you for education, the gifts that they bring and the skills that they need to develop to be successful here? What do you see?
One of the gifts is obviously having the knowledge of two cultures. Having, it's like their culture and then coming to learn a different culture, being able to adapt. So it's like they can bounce from one to the other. So that's a wonderful gift that I see, because you can relate to both individuals. It's like, for example, with me, it's like I can relate to the North Americans, but I can also relate working with Central and South Americans. So for me, that's really important. It's like that. It's not just seeing one way, but being able to see the whole picture. And it's like, and that's, for me, that's a big gift. And where I've learned that is actually living here, because I'm from California. So it's like, for me, it was a major melting pot being from California. It's like, I didn't see the difference, or I didn't feel it as much. But coming here, I was like, oh, okay, it's different. But it's like I've been able to go both ways. And the same thing with the students that I work with. It's like, they're learning a new language. They're learning to get, they're getting used to a new culture. And for them, it's like at the same time, it's, it's difficult for them. But then at the same time, they're like, oh, okay. They are able to share that with other people around them. So for me, that's a big gift, because it's like, it's giving more spice to life, let's say. It's not bland, because you get to mix different things into the pot.
Well, it reminds me of technology in the sense that when I was born, we had this black and white TV with knobs that were always falling off, probably because I was pulling them off or something. But we haven't, with our technology, our shared technology just of television sets, we don't walk into people's houses and expect to see a television set from the early 1960s, And it reminds me of computers. So we as human beings don't have, say, a 286 processor in our heads, that whole can't teach a dog new tricks. The reality is that, I completely embrace biculturalism, but I really push for beyond biculturalism, multiculturalism, or multiple culturalism. So I feel now, after working hard and I'll continue to do this for the rest of my life, but navigating amongst multiple populations of people. So I feel confident that I can go into the African American community or the Native American community or any number of white communities or the Latino community or whatever. I feel confident that I'm not an expert within multiple communities, but I'm not going to embarrass myself within those communities. I'm not going to shame my ancestors within those communities. I know how to act gracious and humble, and I know how to respect elders, and I know how to, interact with children, and I haven't had to give anything up to become like that. So I mean, I tend to think more within a pluralistic, setting where it's not about assimilating and giving something up, or I've learned one way and I can't learn something else. I mean, I just think that stuff's nonsense. We have this processor that's much more powerful than, say, a 286. Where I just can't take in any more information because my head is full. I mean, that's totally nonsense. We all have these, I think, endless spirits. And we start telling ourselves, well, I can't be around that group because they're too strange, or I don't know what they believe in, or whatever. And so I think that you put in the effort and you put in the work, and I think you can navigate amongst multiple populations of people. So
You didn't say this explicitly, so don't let me put words into your mouth. But what I'm hearing, I guess, from both of you, especially when you make reference to multiple cultures, is that immigrant populations in particular are actually putting in the effort to acquire multiple cultures. In fact, they have to do that as a matter of survival. It seems to be mainstream Americans that don't want to do that. Would that be accurate?
I mean, I guess I would guess that in the safest settings possible. So let's say in this region, in the safest settings possible, so that might be the Asian celebration, that might be the, I can't remember what we had a couple months ago at the fairgrounds. It was some kind of Slavic festival, or maybe it's the Scottish festival down River Road, or it's the Oktoberfest over in the Bethel area, or the Scandinavian festival. I mean, those are the
Fiesta Latina coming up.
Well, go to Springfield, or some powwow at some university or college. I mean, those are very safe places to go dabble in other people's cultures. So I mean, it's really not asking a lot of people, and there are people, unfortunately, that just flat out will avoid, certain types of festivals because they don't want to be around certain types of people or whatever. So I think there is something to be said for people who come here, regardless of where they're coming from, to kind of check out the landscape and try to, either get themselves familiar with the landscape or their offspring. So, for example, I'm the child of an immigrant who came to this country in the early 60s, but I'm also the ancestor of immigrants who came here from Europe at the turn of the last century. And the degree to which we're assimilated or acculturated, I mean, that is an effort that we've put in versus the people around us who have tried to learn what we have to offer.
Leslie, do you think, well, you're an educator, so do you use those concepts about assimilation and acculturation, and do you see the effects of education being able to, how do you define assimilation and acculturation, and how does that affect your work? I guess that's the question.
Well, I work with people that, it's like, I work with people that it's like, that assimilated, would that be like, getting, coming to a different culture and getting used, adjusting to that culture, or completely forgetting their own culture?
Assimilated would be, from a drug counselor's point of view, assimilated means you erase your culture. Acculturated means you get used to and incorporate other aspects of another culture but maintain your own. So you may learn how to eat chopsticks, but you still, that doesn't mean you don't lose how to use a fork.
Yeah. So it's like, there are, I've worked with people with both. That have acculturated and have assimilated. And, from what they've said, I've asked them. There's been students that I'm like, okay, that have look, from Latin America, but may not want to speak the language. And I've asked them, it's like, I'm like, why have you given up your language? Have you given up your culture? And some of them have said, I'm in a different country. I have to do what they do here. That's the way that I'm going to be accepted. I've had individuals that have done that, and I've had individuals that have acculturated where they, will accept the culture that they're around, but have not given up their culture, and have found to educate and share their culture with other individuals who are willing to, learn about it. But it's difficult for people, and it's difficult for individuals. It's like, people will ask me, they'll confuse me. Are you Native American? Are you Filipina? I had a student come to me, oh, what tribe are you from? And I was like, my family's from El Salvador, but, it's like, and then they're like, oh, do you speak the language? And then they're surprised that I speak it. And I'm like, yes. I was like, it's great having two cultures, having having both cultures, so it's like, but yeah, it's like I've worked with people from different, that have done both. And, again, it's like it's been different reasons, and it's interesting at the same time to hear their story on why some of them choose to give up, what they were raised with, and give it up in order to be able to be, in their eyes and opinion, to be accepted to their new community.
I don't want to necessarily influence you, but in my professional culture, that is substance abuse prevention and treatment, it's very bad to give up your culture.
Yeah.
In fact, it's dangerous. Basically, the data that we have with immigrant populations in terms of drug use, it's like, well, there's a plus. One, they use drugs less. Two, there's a value for education. Three, value for family, value for authority. The kids don't talk back to their parents. I mean, there are a number of things that, in terms of the whole family values question that immigrants bring to the table, and including, the lower drug use piece is a plus. What happens and what becomes more dangerous from a substance abuse context is that the longer they're here in America, the more they lose their language, they lose the cultural protective factors, the more they become like Americans, that is, drug using, alcoholic, domestic violence, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The things add up. And basically, in substance abuse prevention, assimilation is the bad no thing to have happen. So that when Michael's talking about adding capacity, it's better to have multiple languages. People who speak multiple languages are demonstrably more intelligent. So why would you make somebody less intelligent? And why would you become like Americans who, well, it's hard not to say this, but again, why would you become less intelligent and more substance abusing when, there are things that are positive about your culture? When you talk about, for example, your experience in traveling between North and Central and South America, what are some of the gifts that you see people bringing, if you could articulate that? I mean, I know what they are from a substance abuse perspective, but in terms of like the nitty-gritty realities that people bring, what do you see?
They're very welcoming. They're very warm. So when I go to El Salvador, just speaking, when they find out, oh, you're the granddaughter of this person, oh, please come into my house. It's very welcoming, very warm, where I'm not used to that here. Over here, people are too busy. They're working. They come home, they cook, they have their dinners and go to bed. And you don't have time to socialize and get to know other people. And then that's one gift. It's like over there in El Salvador.
Yeah.
In El Salvador, it's like the person will give their last piece of chicken, their last egg, for you to enjoy in order to spend time with them and get to know the family and spend quality time. It's like, it's very warm. And over here, it's like I have students come to me and tell me, they're like, oh, you know what, I just brought some tacos, I just brought some pupusas, would you like to share it with me? It's like it's very, welcoming. And the family, the traditions, the culture, again, El Salvador, we have our typical dishes. And, it's really nice, in order to be, for me to have both worlds. And again, family's really important. The part about being bilingual. I tell my brother, I'm like, you know what? You better teach the kids how to speak Spanish. Teach them the Salvadorian culture. For us, we're going to teach her, when we have children, the Salvadorian and the Mexican culture. It's like if I have a chance, send my kids to Mexico and El Salvador. They'll be here year round, but on their summer vacations, not forget their ancestors. Not forget the stories of why my mother and father came to this country. So we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for our parents. I wouldn't be the person that I am if it wasn't for my parents. My ancestors. All the history, everything that they've instilled in us, I wouldn't be that person. For me, that's really important, and I'm like, I'm second generation here in this country. My little niece, she doesn't want to speak English, so I'll talk to her in Spanish. She understands it, and she'll go, ay, tía, and I was like, no. I don't speak English. Talk to me in Spanish. So again, it's like, that's what, it's like in order for her to, and then we give her books and we read her stories about the Aztecs and the Mayans, in order for her to know the history of our ancestors. So for me, it's sad if you don't know where you come from, because that's, if you know where you come from, you know who you are. If you don't know where you come from, you don't know, it's like your ancestors, all the great history that's behind it. For me, it's a big loss. But with the students that I work with, the same thing. It's like I love working with the students I work with because I get to learn so much about them, and just seeing how they, socialize with each other. Let it be the Asian students, the African Americans, the Latinos, Middle Easterns. It's just awesome just watching all of them socialize together and share with each other. So it's a community. So.
In a welcoming way that you might not necessarily see with native Oregonians of a different hue, shall we say.
Mm-hmm.
The father of Cuauhtémoc Balam, as head of ethnic studies, how does ethnic studies assist with this process?
I think it's it's extremely important for me that in whatever way possible, my students are able to try to understand their own unique history. Why I say, in whatever way possible. Some people are adopted, and it's too difficult for them to try to track who their people are. Some people, their families have assimilated to such a degree that just everything has been completely lost. But I'm just very much convinced that the more that people are able to understand and honor and appreciate their own backgrounds and their own ancestors, at that point, that is when we can come together at the table and really start understanding the commonalities that we have as human beings. People want to strip apart, our uniqueness and say, well, let's just come together first as human beings. But then, to me, that's the assimilation process. Let's just strip everything away. Versus, let's have our own uniqueness and come to the table, and then let's agree on kind of certain standards that we'll have within our society, because a lot of people start thinking you go down a path of pluralism where everybody maintains their uniqueness or their separateness, and then we're going to have this divided country. But the reality is, within pluralistic theory, aside from our uniqueness or our kind of the things that make us who we are, you come to the table together as equal partners, and you start hammering out what kind of society that we would all want to live at, a society where we would live together and we would share power equally. Because that's a big thing about assimilation, is that you're not an equal member within power. You might be an equal member in terms of speaking fluent English, but as I've been reminded on multiple occasions, whether people are asking me, well, where are you from? And I say, Eugene. And they start acting like I didn't understand what the hell the question was. No, we mean, well, where are you really from? Dude, I heard you the first time. I'm from Sacred Heart. And or being, followed in a store. Or followed in a store is kind of, there are two things that happen in the local community. One is where people will follow you in the store, so you're getting a lot of attention. Or the opposite thing will happen where I'm standing at the counter waiting for my deli chicken, and I know I don't need any more deli chicken, but I'm waiting for my deli chicken, and some white person walks up after me, and then they turn around and they want to help them first. So it's, these things are playing out. Someone commenting to me that, wow, you speak English really well. How long did you study, the language? I'm like, oh, I don't know. I guess since day one. So, I mean, those are constant reminders where I'm being told you best assimilate and you need to be like us. But at the exact same time, we're always going to be challenging you, and reminding you that you're not a full member of our society. So, I don't know, within ethnic studies, I think that I think it's important to try to expose people to information that maybe they've never been exposed to before, but it's still extremely important for the students to understand that it's up to them to make whatever conclusions that they want to, come up with. I don't like the idea of, standing before somebody and saying, this is the truth, or this is the absolute truth, or you better buy into, what I have to sell, because I don't think that that's very productive. But I think ethnic studies is a very powerful discipline in that, it's able to push our thinking of what we thought was the truth, or, instead of everything being black and white, we're able to kind of see more of the gray. So at least that's the way I interpret ethnic studies.
I'd say that's a blessing and a curse, because as an example, I mean, what you're talking about, the store incidents, and where are you from, where were you born, you speak English very well, I get the, personally I get the, oh, you don't look the way you sound over the phone. When people come in to meet me, they're expecting a blonde-haired, blue-eyed, 6-foot Mark Harris, okay, like whatever, where I come from, professional black people sound like this, so you must be from Oregon. Leslie getting the, oh, you're Indian, oh, you're this, that, and the other, and not expecting you, but talking about, that situation whether, I can envision, the Asians and the Mexicans and the Middle Easterns, getting together and sharing and being welcoming, and that being kind of like the vision for the country, but not necessarily having to fight, what Michael referred to as, Massa's view. It's like, why do we have to accept Massa's view, and then how do we teach, our newly acquired immigrants to not only value their culture, but also say, look, you can deal as equals with these folks, and you have something to bring to the table that you shouldn't lose. In fact, that you should be able to actively not just celebrate, but embody too, because America needs you. Because, we're making major blunders from not knowing about history, not knowing about people's culture, trying, all three of us are not ever, despite our diction, if we lose our accents, we are not going to bleach our skins. Our hair will gray, but we are not going to be bleached. We can't ever be white, and I don't want to. If I want to, I'll take a new body, with white people. But again, the idea about American being white American kind of goes along with, I guess just to get back to the immigration thing, even then, I think I want to just touch on it and leave it. I mean, it's like we talk about, or the white people talk about 12 million illegal immigrants, and it's about illegality, breaking the law, when 500,000 of those illegal immigrants are white people from Canada or Europe, and they're illegal too. Arnold Schwarzenegger was an illegal alien. All right, and they're talking about amending the Constitution so he can run for president because he can't now. All right, but he overstayed his visa, and most of the illegal immigrants have overstayed their visa. So how is it that we're looking for brown people in immigration and not for the illegal white people? So when I ask that question, and I have asked that question of the anti-immigrant, well, they're closer to our they've actually said that. They're closer to our culture. Wait a minute, how is a German closer to America unless you mean Nazi as if you mean racist? If that's what you're saying, if that's the kind of people you want, why? Who said America has to be, racist? Because there are racist elements to the immigration policy, as I talked about with the Cuban.
Well, we have these various standards, so we differentiate in this country the degree of criminality. So jaywalking is not seen as the same as murder. That's what I mean by that. So we've been able to differentiate the different criminal activities will, be dealt with in a more severe way. So there's that piece. And then let's say you are paying your fees and you're taking the civics test and you're doing everything you need to do as a non-citizen to become a citizen, to naturalize. So within that process, we want people, of good moral character. And within good moral character, the federal government has outlined exactly what good moral character is going to be. So when we start talking about immigrants coming to this country and we start talking about, certain people want to pull themselves away from the racist rhetoric that, for example, Mexicans or Latin Americans are savages or they're beasts or they have diseases or, they're crapping in the fields to give people, some kind of sickness, as I heard on the radio recently. We want to pull ourselves away from some of that racist rhetoric and say, we actually don't have a problem with Mexicans, but what we have a problem with is people without the proper documentation, which means they're illegal. So we're going to have a problem with them because they're illegal. They are. But within our standards, where I'm putting murder on one side and jaywalking on the other, where on that continuum is the wrong documentation or expired documentation? And it just kind of gets back to the same kind of this rhetoric towards certain populations of people and, we need to have a problem with them because they don't have the right documentation. Okay. I guess I can be upset with them too, especially if they're, say, a murderer or a pedophile. But if they're hardworking and a family person and they go to church and they're staying out of trouble and the only problem we have with them is their paperwork, then I'm not really sweating that too much.
But sometimes I think the paperwork is an excuse actually for something else because we can't actually be against them because of the color of their skin. We actually can't do that in the 21st century.
We have internal identified U.S. citizens who want to harm me or my child or my wife or you or Leslie, and draw their little swastikas and do their little salutes. And, we have U.S. citizens like that. And there's all this kind of internal kind of terrorist threat, I believe, with mailing off letters with anthrax and all this nonsense. So, yeah, if you want me to be sweating people coming across the border to do a job that I'm too damn lazy to do versus a U.S. citizen who wants to kill my ass because I'm brown, yeah, let's have that discussion.
I guess I think that issue of criteria is a critical one because, for example, I hate to be a skipping CD about this, but as a son of a doctor, I am partial to people who want to become doctors, and Ennis Cosby was a medical student about to become a doctor and was killed by a Russian immigrant. Now, who basically made a point of saying, I killed a nigger. Now, Ennis was changing a tire in Bel Air when he was identified by Marcus F. and then killed by Marcus F. in an attempted carjacking or robbery. Now, it very carefully left unsaid whether Marcus F. was a legal or an illegal immigrant, but given give him the benefit of the doubt and say that he was a legal Russian immigrant. Did he learn his racism in Russia, or was he encouraged to become racist here in America? And basically, is that the kind of immigrant we want? Because clearly that is not, in terms of a pluralistic society. So we have to get real about whether or not we're going to take race out of the question and actually do judge people by the content of their character and their behavior and their actions. Do either of you have final statements? We're in the last minute or so.
No, I just want to thank you for inviting me, and hope that this program is successful, and that people that are watching are able to, if nothing else, be challenged by what they're exposed to.
Cool.
Yeah, I want to thank you also, and I'm just saying, it's like in an ideal world, it's like it'd be nice that all of us would just take the time to get to know each other before we judge someone for who they are, for the color that they are, for the way that they look, and then just get to, treat others the way that we would want to be treated, and it's like in every aspect. So, but thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for coming. So next week we will be looking at women, gender, GLBT issues. Which camera? No, I think it's this camera. So we'll be looking next March 5th, gender, GLBT, and Two-Spirit issues on DiversiTV. We hope to see you then. Till then, go well, stay well.